Tensions between China and the Philippines over the disputed South China Sea are increasing. The Chinese Coast Guard
Whether you're tuning in from Manila, Cebu, or California, this is one of those moments when history feels like it's unfolding in real time. Because right now, the South China Sea, that huge blue expanse that carries almost a quarter of global trade, has once again turned into the world's most dangerous patch of water. And at the center of it all, China is telling the Philippines to cease its farces. Yeah, you heard that right. Cease its farces. Beijing's latest diplomatic dagger thrown across the waves. Let's break this down together. No dry lectures, no political jargon. Just you, me, and the story of how two nations, one rising superpower and one defiant island republic, are colliding over sovereignty, pride, and survival in the South China Sea. It's mid-October 2025. Chinese state TV flashes breaking news. The Ministry of National Defense steps up to the mic. Spokesperson Zhang Zhaogang stares straight at the camera and declares that the Philippines must, quote, give up its unrealistic illusions and cease its farces in the South China Sea. Strong words and a very public scolding. This wasn't just routine propaganda. It was Beijing sending a message loud enough for Washington, Tokyo, and every fisherman in the Philippines to hear.
While our government vessels and fisher folk continue to be harassed in our own waters, and as we remain on the receiving end of illegal, coercive, aggressive, and dangerous actions in the South China Sea.
The immediate trigger? Two things. First, Chinese officials accused the Philippines of what they called an illegal intrusion when Philippine vessels entered waters near the Nansha Islands, which Filipinos know as the Spratlys. And second, Beijing lashed out after a Philippine defense official reaffirmed Manila's sovereignty over Huangyan Island, or as we know it, Scarborough Shoal. In other words, both sides are doubling down. China says the area is theirs historically. The Philippines says international law says otherwise. And that clash of history versus law, of giant versus underdog, is now playing out almost weekly on the high seas. Tensions didn't just appear overnight. Over the past 2 years, what used to be occasional standoffs have escalated into near-weekly confrontations between Chinese and Philippine ships. Since 2023, the Chinese Coast Guard has taken a far more aggressive posture, blasting Philippine supply vessels with high-pressure water cannons, cutting off their paths and even ramming them. In videos now circulating online, you can literally hear the panic in Filipino sailors' voices as Chinese ships close in, sirens blaring, spraying torrents of water across decks. It looks less like maritime law enforcement and more like warfare without bullets. By October 2025, it's almost routine. A standoff here, a ramming there, warnings blared over radio frequencies, all while diplomatic notes fly between Beijing and Manila like angry emails in a bad breakup. And then came the spark. On October 12th, a Chinese Coast Guard ship rammed and damaged the Philippine government vessel BRP Datu Pagbuwaya near Thitu Island. China claimed the Filipino crew had violated its sovereignty. The Philippines called it an act of aggression. The footage? Brutal. Steel scraping against steel. Jets of water slamming into the ship's bridge. Manila vowed, quote, "We will not yield a single square inch of our territory." Only days later, on October 16th, China's military claimed it had expelled 2 Philippine aircraft near Scarborough Shoal. The planes, Beijing said, had illegally entered Chinese airspace.
The Philippine Air Force, on the other hand, accused China of endangering pilots and violating international airspace rules.
And that's when Zhang Xiaogang's October 18th warning, the cease farces, remark, came down like a hammer. But what exactly does China mean when it calls the Philippines' actions farces? In Beijing's view, it's simple. It believes the Philippines is staging provocations, sending vessels, journalists, and Coast Guard crews to disputed waters to attract sympathy, internationalize the conflict, and drag in the United States. From China's perspective, the Philippines is acting like a troublemaker, emboldened by foreign backing. Let's be clear though, this isn't just about insults. It's about who gets to control some of the richest, most strategic waters on Earth.
China's argument rests on history and on its own interpretation of old treaties.
Beijing says its sovereignty over the Nansha Islands and the Scarborough Shoal is crystal clear. Chinese scholars cite maps, ancient records, and crucially, a series of treaties that, in their view, define the Philippine archipelago's legal boundaries. These include the 1898 Treaty of Paris, which transferred the Philippines from Spain to the United States, the 1900 Treaty of Washington, and the 1930 Convention between the US and Britain. Together, China argues, these documents set the Philippine boundary east of 118 degrees longitude, leaving the Scarborough Shoal west of that line outside Philippine territory. In other words, Beijing insists the treaties are clear. Huangyan Dao was never yours.
And then comes the sting.
The Philippines, says Zhang Xiaogang, has deliberately distorted historical and legal facts to justify its infringements and provocations. From China's side, this is not a dispute. It's a matter of defending what's already theirs. That's why Beijing keeps using phrases like resolute measures. And indeed, they've been taking them.
The Philippines strongly protests the recent approval by the State Council of China of the establishment of the so-called Huangyan Island National Nature Reserve.
Just last month, China designated part of Scarborough Shoal as a national nature reserve, a move that sounds eco-friendly, but analysts say is aimed at asserting administrative control. Think of it like planting a flag, just with bureaucracy instead of troops. The Philippines protested furiously. China didn't blink. Meanwhile, Chinese Coast Guard and maritime militia ships continue their gray zone tactics. Coercive moves that stop short of war but keep the pressure constant.
They block resupply missions to Philippine outposts, use blinding lasers, and jam radio frequencies.
In August 2025, Beijing even claimed it had driven away a US-guided missile destroyer, the USS Higgins, from waters near Scarborough Shoal, marking the first such encounter in 6 years. Washington dismissed that claim, saying the US Navy was conducting lawful operations under international law. But it was a clear sign. America is watching. And that brings us to Manila's side of the story. The Philippines isn't taking this lying down. Since President Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. took office, the country's approach to China has hardened dramatically. Gone are the days of quiet diplomacy. Marcos has embraced confrontation, backed by legality and alliances.
In November 2024, he made a historic move. He enshrined the 2016 Arbitral Tribunal ruling, the landmark case that invalidated China's 9-dash line into Philippine domestic law. That ruling, handed down by the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague, declared that China's sweeping maritime claims had no legal basis. The court sided decisively with the Philippines. China rejected the ruling as null and void. But for the Philippines, it became the foundation of national maritime policy. "We are not the intruders," said Marcos. "We are the rightful defenders of our seas." And the Philippines isn't standing alone. The United States has made it very clear that it's backing its treaty ally.
Next day in Washington, a first step is taken in the direction demanded by Dewey as the United States and the Philippines sign a mutual defense treaty.
In March 2024, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin reaffirmed that the 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty, MDT, covers armed attacks on public vessels, aircraft, and armed forces, anywhere in the South China Sea. Translation: if China attacks a Philippine government ship, it could trigger U.S. intervention.
Today, we mark a historic moment, the first ever leaders summit between the United States, Japan, and the Philippines. And it's truly an honor to have you both here as we begin this new era of a partnership. As you've heard me say before, a great deal of history in our world will be written in the Indo-Pacific over the coming years.
Then, in April 2024, the U.S., Japan, and the Philippines held a trilateral summit that directly condemned China's maritime behavior. Not once, but 4 times. A month later, in May 2025, the Philippines conducted joint naval drills with Japan off the coast of Luzon, focusing on anti-submarine warfare and coordinated defense. All of this has China fuming. Beijing sees it as containment, a US-led plot to encircle it through military and diplomatic pressure. For the Philippines, it's deterrence, a way to survive in the shadow of a superpower. And yet, even with all this, the clashes continue. Take a step back and you'll see a clear pattern. Escalation layered on escalation. On September 16, 2025, a Philippine ship was damaged by Chinese water cannons near Scarborough Shoal, injuring a crew member. China said the Filipino vessel had rammed its Coast Guard ship. Manila said the attack was unprovoked. Each incident now triggers a war of press statements, diplomatic protests, and viral social media clips. Each side fighting not just for territory, but for public opinion.
I think that they are trying to put out there that the takeover of Scarborough Shoal is complete, that the Philippines would be best, and the rest of the world would be best served simply to move along, except that China is going to be the steward of Scarborough Shoal, and that it will be an environmentally responsible steward.
The real danger here isn't just a single clash, it's the risk of a miscalculation. A collision at sea, a weapon fired in panic, and suddenly you have a regional crisis. Analysts warn that communication lines between Beijing and Manila are breaking down. In 2024, Philippine defense officials said China often ignores calls for de-escalation. Even the hotlines designed to prevent accidents sometimes go unanswered. So why does all this matter, beyond pride or politics? Because the South China Sea is one of the world's economic arteries. Around $5.3 trillion worth of trade, that's about a quarter of all global maritime goods, passes through these waters every single year. Oil tankers, container ships, gas carriers, everything from electronics to energy flows through these sea lanes. Cut them off, and you're talking about supply chain chaos, energy shocks, and higher prices worldwide. For China, about 80% of its imported energy moves through these routes. That's why it calls the region its lifeline. For the Philippines, those same waters are its fishing grounds, livelihood zones, and part of its exclusive economic zone, EEZ. Losing access doesn't just mean losing pride. It means losing food and income for millions of Filipinos. And it's not just about trade. Beneath the seabed lie potential reserves of oil and gas, untapped energy wealth that could power economies for decades. Add to that the region's abundant fish stocks, essential for food security, and you start to understand why every rock, reef, and shoal is so fiercely contested. Since 2013, China has built artificial islands across the Spratlys, reclaiming about 5 square miles of land. These aren't just piles of sand, they're mini military bases, complete with airstrips, radar domes, and missile systems. Satellite images show anti-aircraft weapons and runways long enough for fighter jets. Beijing calls them defensive, The Philippines and the US call them militarization. The result is a chessboard of tension. Chinese ships swarm disputed reefs. Philippine fishermen risk their lives just to cast nets. American surveillance planes fly overhead. Japanese and Australian naval ships pass through in freedom of navigation patrols. Every move is recorded, tweeted, analyzed. A 21st century standoff playing out live online. And here's the part that hits home. The ordinary people caught in the middle. Fishermen from Zambales and Palawan talk about Chinese ships chasing them away, even destroying their nets. They say they're terrified, but they have no choice. This is their livelihood. Meanwhile, in Beijing, nationalists flood social media demanding the government teach the Philippines a lesson. Both sides are feeding domestic pride, and that makes compromise even harder. So what's next? Can this spiral be stopped? China says it prefers a dual-track approach. Disputes handled bilaterally, while broader regional peace is managed through ASEAN. In theory, that sounds reasonable. In practice, it often means Beijing wants to talk one-on-one, where its leverage is strongest, instead of facing a united ASEAN or Western bloc. The Philippines, on the other hand, insist on international law and multilateral dialogue. And with US backing, it's growing bolder, filing diplomatic protests, releasing footage of Chinese harassment, and inviting journalists on resupply missions to document everything. Many analysts say we're approaching a breaking point. A fundamental breakdown in communication, one expert called it. Each side now interprets the other's actions as provocation. Each is unwilling to back down. And the longer this goes on, the greater the chance that a small spark, one mistaken shot, one ramming gone too far, could ignite a much larger fire. At the heart of it all is pride and principle. For China, this is about restoring its historic power, reversing what it calls a century of humiliation. For the Philippines, it's about national dignity and the right to exist freely in its own waters. For the US, it's about defending allies and keeping the sea lanes open. Let's be honest, no one wants war. But right now, diplomacy feels like it's running out of oxygen. If you zoom out, the South China Sea dispute is really a mirror of the 21st century world order. Old powers clashing with rising ones, law colliding with force, and small nations caught between giants. Every ramming, every water cannon blast, every fiery press conference is part of that bigger story. So as we close, let's go back to where we began. October 18th, 2025. Zhang Zhaogang at the podium, eyes firm, declaring, "The Philippines has no grounds to justify or deny its intrusions, provocations, and wrongdoings. China will continue to take resolute measures to firmly safeguard its territorial sovereignty." That's China's final word, for now. But in Manila, in Washington, in Tokyo, people are asking, what happens when words stop working? The South China Sea may look calm from the sky, but beneath the waves, it's boiling with history, politics, and pride. And as long as both sides keep their ships on collision course, the question isn't whether another confrontation will happen, it's when. For now, the world watches. Fishermen sail, coast guards shadow each other, diplomats exchange notes, and the South China Sea, that glittering expanse, remains the stage for one of the most dangerous geopolitical dramas of our time. If you liked the video, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe our channel for deep analysis of contemporary issues.